Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Alex De Minaur, champion in Washington, D.C., just barely by 16 millimeters to be exact. If you take championship point number 3 into consideration, he wins his 10th career title, and Alejandro Davidovich Fokina continues the hunt for his first. It is, for a second time this year, an absolutely heart-wrenching defeat for Davidovich Fokina, and we will talk about that. We will also do a quick preview of the National Bank Open. The men are in Toronto this year. I am obviously posting this week's episode late. Came from a wedding over the weekend in Syracuse, returning to my university for the first time in 4 years and change. So that was really nice, but it did put me behind, and I was commentating on Tennis Channel 2 on this Monday, so I couldn't get to it very quickly at all. So yeah, ran out of time to do, basically, all that to say, I can't do my regular quarter-by-quarter preview, but I will give my semifinal predictions and my championship predictions for the Canada Masters, which is wide open this year, as we will discuss. Let's go to Washington, though. Let's get started. I was planning on just starting with the championship points. Then I realized that I want to set some context here. Over the course of a match, you're going to win points 20 different ways, depending on how narrow or broad you want to or how granular you want to get when it comes to outcomes. Maybe it's 100 ways if you want to get super detailed with it. But the point is, not every point is going to be the same. There's going to be a lot of different ways you're winning points. Sometimes you do have a workhorse, though. And Alex De Minaur, despite the fact that this was a highly competitive match that could have gone either way, he did have a workhorse. There is an outcome that he was able to generate with consistency. A spot where he was able to generate and force errors out of his opponent. And that was getting the ball hard and low at Davidovich Fokina's forehand. Now, Foki's backhand, in my opinion, was the best ground stroke on the court for most of the match. It was stunning at times. It was a difference maker. It was coming up with those special moments that you need in a match where returns are going to come into play. You have two of the fastest players in the world. And you look at this matchup and you think, how is either player going to finish? And sometimes it was the specialness of Fokina's backhand that was the answer to that question. But his forehand anchored him down, at least to some extent. Especially when he was moving to his right and playing from below his waist. And in those circumstances, it was Spray City. It was Shank City. And that's what De Minaur was able to profit off of on a consistent basis. He looked to exploit it the whole match, even in the first set, which he lost. Now, one adjustment that I do think he made, he started slicing more often in the second and the third set with his backhand, down the middle, down the line. But De Minaur, in order to keep the ball low, he doesn't need to slice. He is in the bottom 10% of topspin off of both wings. And he is a master at directing flat, low backhands down the line with his hyper-abbreviated setup on the backhand wing. That makes it easier for him to time the ball, and that allows him to play a flat delivery with not a lot of net clearance, but he's so precise, and he hits the ball so clean, it still ends up being a relatively consistent and high percentage ground stroke for him. And De Minaur was looking for this over and over again. Tennis Insights was able to provide me with some detailed analytics on this. Thank you to them and Tennis Viz. 135 neutral backhands in the match for De Minaur. The tour average on a neutral backhand to go down the line is 28%. No surprise that there's a massive bias towards taking a neutral ball cross-court over the lower part of the net with more court to hit into. At the end of the day, it is a rally ball. But De Minaur goes down the line more often than most. He takes the neutral backhand down the line 34.6% of the time. But in this match, he took what is already a tendency that beats the tour average, and he raised it to even another level, taking a pretty astronomical 40% of his neutral backhands down the line at Davidovich Fokina's forehand. So this was the tactic, and it was fruitful. Why? Why does Davidovich Fokina miss so often when he's hitting low running forehands? I can't tell you definitively. Maybe I'm not smart enough to tell you definitively. He does bring his hands very high in the setup. Maybe that makes it a little bit harder for him to play from low contacts. That would be a question that I might ask certain mechanical experts. It's a theory that maybe I would throw out, but it is by no means something that I'm telling you definitively. I do watch the match, though, and I think to myself, man, Davidovich Fokina's backhand has a lot of qualities that you love that the forehand doesn't have. The backhand of Foki is easy power, smooth power that comes from the timing of the shot, that comes from the natural momentum built into his technique. He comes through the ball and it feels seamless. The forehand is a lot more noisy. There's way more energy being put into the shot in order to make it go. The tempo is much less consistent. The balance isn't as consistent. The head moves more. And it has the appearance, at least on a more regular basis, that he's muscling the ball or that he's snatching at the ball. So with that, let's talk about the comeback. And it didn't start at 5-4 when Davidovich Fokina held 3 championship points. It started in the game before when Davidovich Fokina was serving for this championship. And he got off to a great start in the game. He went up 30-love. He double faulted on a wide serve on the deuce side. And when I say wide, I mean wide. He missed it wide. He was pretty aggressive on this second serve. You don't love to miss. You don't love to double fault wide. It just calls into question, were you going for the sideline on a second serve? Because the risk reward of trying to play slower second serves close to the sideline isn't usually really there. So, okay. There was that. Double fault at 30-love. And then what do we get? At 30-15, De Minaur hits a backhand slice cross court into a forehand inside in. And again, we get a running forehand for Davidovich Fokina, and he shanks it. It's not an unforced error. It's a forced error, but he was there in plenty of time, and it was a defendable ball. 30-all, De Minaur hits a return that pops up off the tape. And it actually is a net cord that should have helped Davidovich Fokina, but he blasts the forehand inside out wide of the sideline. This was an easy attack, and Fokina just overplayed it. 30-40, break point. De Minaur backhand bunted down the middle, low, at Davidovich Fokina's forehand. This is a low, like knee-high contact point. It's another shank forehand on forced error. So at 5-3, we see a double fault and 3 forehand errors. Now let's go to 4-5. We're back on serve, but De Minaur double faults twice in this game and gives Fokina an opportunity, especially after Davidovich Fokina, his forehand, answers the bell on a couple of attacking chances. He was down at in this game, and he came up with 2 big forehands to earn his first match point. And at this point, we'll go into some film study. All right, first championship point, first serve out wide for Demon, draws a short return, backhand approach down the line, knocks away the volley. Fokina hit that pass hard, but it was in a very comfortable location for De Minaur to finish the volley. So on paper, that's just a perfectly executed point by Alex. Nothing Davidovich Fokina can do. I mostly agree with that line of thought, but I do have one bone to pick with how Davidovich Fokina played this point. And that has to do with his off-ball movement and his positioning. After hitting a short return at De Minaur's backhand, if we just kind of freeze it right here, and I know, look, tennis is played at very high speeds, and when you slow it down, things could seem very, very obvious when in reality they're not. But having watched the entire match up until this point, I don't think there's any way De Minaur is hitting this backhand approach cross-court into Fokina's backhand. He had already been favoring the backhand down the line very heavily relative to how most players operate. There is always a preference for players to approach down the line more often than cross-court, just in general. And obviously, that's where the open court is here because the serve dragged Fokina out towards the opposite sideline. But there is zero anticipation here from Davidovich Fokina. He's not leaning right at all. He's playing it straight up, and he's so explosive and fast that he still ends up getting to this ball. But I could have, look, let me put it this way. If this is Andy Murray, I think he's already breaking towards the deuce side early and just sort of reading the most likely scenario that De Minaur was going to hit this backhand down the line. So that's the only thing I'd say for Davidovich Fokina. The anticipation could have been there, and it wasn't. Next point, this is a really good point. Second serve, deep return by Foki. De Minaur absorbs it, keeps his shot deep. They're going to go backhand to backhand here. That's a good rip by De Minaur. Great backhand slice defense from Fokina. Little bit of back and forth slicing. Neutral backhand cross by ADF. And bang, as soon as De Minaur gets a little bit of time from a neutral position on his backhand, he's going hard down the line again. And this time, it's a very difficult ball for Fokina to defend. It was an exceptional backhand from De Minaur. Look how low this stays. Look how the side spin almost has this tailing away from Davidovich Fokina. And yeah, that's a really difficult shot to even make back in the court. And Foki was close, but he didn't get there. Again, if there's one thing you could nitpick, it's just that he's not really covering this. I mean, seemingly there's no off-ball lean towards just taking away the shot that De Minaur has used all match long to destroy you. There's just nothing there where it's like, let me make him beat me cross-court, if anything, because he's beaten me down the line so often. And there's time here for Fokina to just be a little bit more aggressive with his recovery and get closer to the middle, but he doesn't, and he gets burned again. It's a small thing, but I do think it's relevant here. All right, third match point. This is the one, man. This is crazy stuff. Solid return from Fokina. Now, let me just actually go back here. So we've talked about how often De Minaur was hitting his backhand down the line. I'm shocked that on this +1 ball, he went cross. But he did. He went for the change-up play. He went cross. And look how it almost loses him this match as Davidovich Fokina, at the first chance, redirects this nice and clean down the line, puts De Minaur on the run, does a great job of getting up on the baseline, taking time away, great forehand approach down the line, slice, backhand lob defense lands on the line. Davidovich Fokina then tries to approach off of this ball, and it's a two-shot pass combination from De Minaur. Let's dissect this a little bit further. All right, obviously Fokina played a great point here, and this is similar to the second match point that he had in Del Rey, where one, Davidovich Fokina did a lot right, and two, there was an extremely close call that ends up not going his way, and it's this one. Now, there's a couple of things to think about here. First, should this have been an overhead? And I don't think the answer is obvious because he's so deep in the court, and some players don't like to hit an overhead from the baseline. If this was practice, or if this was a very low leverage situation in the match, do I think Davidovich Fokina would have probably hit an overhead? Yes, I do. And would it have given him a better chance of finishing this ball? Absolutely. It's an overhead. Instead, he's going to accept a forehand. At face value, I don't have a huge issue with that decision, but it does put Davidovich Fokina in a position where he no longer has great control of the point, but he doesn't want to relinquish that control. So here we have a forehand that Davidovich Fokina hits perfectly. I don't think he could have hit this better. This is a hard forehand down the line, good direction, gets De Minaur stretched out, but we know how quick Alex is. We know how well he controls this backhand pass, and this is a good one, low cross court. At this point, Davidovich Fokina has lost the point. This is too tough a volley. I don't think there's really anybody who would be able to finish this volley other than like the 0.01% of great volleyers on tour. He does it the best he can with this volley, and then De Minaur is going to get up here and make a pass that I feel is underrated. I don't think this is an easy shot. Fokina did anticipate down the line here, so he would have had that one likely covered. De Minaur goes cross court. There's just not a lot of space for Alex to hit into, so I give him a lot of credit for this passing shot. But let's go back to this moment. This is the moment that, and the decision that ends up losing Fokina the point. Based on the fact that he wasn't that far inside the court, he had no pace to work with, no forward momentum, this was a very difficult net approach. See, he can't get very close to the net. That's where the momentum and the position come in. And he can't damage De Minaur because Alex has all day to get into defensive position, and Davidovich Fokina doesn't have any pace to work with. So the net approach isn't really there. The opportunity to come forward wasn't there. Fokina opted for the more passive shot by not hitting the overhead and hitting the forehand instead. But then he put himself in a position where if he didn't severely damage De Minaur, well, now he's coming forward. Now he's in trouble if you're going to come in on a shot that doesn't damage your opponent. At the end of the day, this was an awesome point by De Minaur. Fokina should have won it. It was a defensive lob that hit the outside of the sideline. But if we're going to analyze every aspect of the point, these things all come into play. This third set goes into a tiebreak. It's on serve at 3-4 in the tiebreak. De Minaur hits a forehand cross-court trade. At this point, this rally has been extended, so patience is starting to wear a bit thin, and Davidovich Fokina, about waist high, hits a forehand down the line, very flat, low margin try, and it misses well wide. Forehand unforced error. That's the first mini break. Next point, 3-5, Davidovich Fokina serving. De Minaur backhand slice down the middle of the court. Davidovich Fokina forehand in the net, unforced error. He actually ran around that slightly. It was just a backhand slice right down the middle. What do we have there? Another low forehand. None of these forehands are up around the chest of Davidovich Fokina. That's what De Minaur's ball does. De Minaur hits an ace to seal the championship. And with that, Davidovich Fokina has lost another championship match. Context coming in was a big part of this. I guess I haven't addressed it yet. Well, I've alluded to it. But he was 0-3 in finals. He was up 5-2 in the third set in Delray. He held multiple championship points. He played one of those championship points very, very well and missed a forehand down the line by a sliver, which would have been a winner. Once again, he played two of these championship points very well. But he comes away 0-4, and this is now Julian Benneteau level pain. Julian Benneteau, who is the first name that comes to mind when I think about somebody who never won a title and was way too good to never win a title and just found themselves in tough loss after tough loss in championship matches. Now, Benneteau ended up 0-10, and Davidovich Fokina luckily has quite a ways to go until that point. But it is,, it is, 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 And the nice thing to say, and I've heard this multiple times, the nice thing to say is that it's going to end up being okay. And that Davidovich Fokina is going to get one. Because it makes us feel good to say that. Does it really work like that? Or is tennis cruel? Because everybody was saying that Ons Jabeur was going to win Wimbledon. She has not won Wimbledon. And it doesn't look at the moment as if she ever will. She got close multiple times. But the game was cruel. Alexander Zverev might never win a major. He served for one. He was 2-1 up in another. But it might never happen for him. Tennis can be cruel. So I'm not going to just throw out the platitude of Fokina's going to get one. I'm not just going to throw that out there because I don't think he necessarily will. But the good news for him is that he's good enough to put himself in these positions on a somewhat regular basis. He really is. Kei Nishikori got to a major final against Marin Cilic, U.S. Open 2014. And you felt coming into that final that that just might be his chance. That Kei Nishikori is a very good player, a top 10 stalwart, but not a good enough player in the Big Four era to make a whole lot of major finals. You kind of knew at the time that he wasn't going to be in major finals super often and that that was his chance. And I use that as a counter example because Foki's not like that. I think he is so good, so talented. His ability is at a point where he's going to find himself in finals. This won't, I don't think this will be his last one. And it's just a matter of getting the job done at some point. But obviously the scar tissue only cuts deeper at this point. Now, I do want to end on a positive here when it comes to Davidovich Fokina. It's very important that we recognize the grander context. I hope Foki recognizes this. His work, the hard work he's put in, the great tennis he's playing, is validated by the number next to his name. This isn't all for nothing. He doesn't leave Washington empty-handed. He leaves Washington having made the final of a 500 tournament. He left February having made the final of 2 separate tournaments. If I were in his team, I'd be very focused on reminding him of that. Alejandro Davidovich Fokina is 11th in the ATP points race today. 11th. The highest he's ever finished a season is 26th. So, make no mistake, Fokina's having an awesome season. And he can lose in a million finals, and that number next to his name will still be validating of the work that he's put in. Notebook dump on the final. De Minaur's first serve percentage has been a fascinating topic for me. He served 58% in this final, which is not very good, but for him, it actually is. De Minaur's first serves in average is 53.7% over the last 52 weeks, which is the worst in the top 50 by some distance. Now, I got the chance on a Tennis Channel broadcast to ask De Minaur about this last week. I don't have the exact quote because I wasn't able to watch it back. But essentially I said, Demon, I know you've been trying to beef up that first serve. Miles per hour continues to go up, but percentage the last couple years is relatively low. I asked him if he's okay with this trade-off, if the high risk profile of his first serve is intentional. It's something I've been wanting to ask him for a very long time. And he said, yes, the priority in recent years has been to get more out of his first serve, more damage. That's been the focus. But he says he's still searching for the balance of keeping his percentage higher. Essentially, the response was, yeah, I'm not so thrilled about how low the first serve percentage is. But he also mentioned that he feels that his second serve win percentage has always been very good. And that's part of why it's okay if he misses more first serves, which is something that I was expecting to hear from him because it makes a lot of sense. I will say he was above his regular average in 4 of his 5 matches in DC this week. So perhaps he is making strides at just making a few more first serves than what he's been doing in the last year or so. Of course, it hasn't been a severe issue for him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had his best results in his career over the course of the last couple of years. Little bit of analysis on Davidovich Fokina's mental game. I watched him in the second set. I thought there was an intensity dip. I watched him in the third set. I thought he was just so intense, like insanely intense. And it's this zone that he gets into from time to time where he's almost like furrowing his eyebrows and playing every point like his life depends on it, which is, first of all, fun to watch. But Fokina also strikes me as someone who has a lot of trouble playing and staying in his optimal intensity level, which for every player is different. For Bjorn Borg, optimal intensity level, emotional intensity, might be a little bit different than Jimmy Connor's or Rafael Nadal's optimal intensity level. But when things get important and Davidovich Fokina is living and dying with every point, he shreds his nerves and he shreds his energy. And De Minaur on the other side of the net, you're watching this contrast of body language and just the management of the emotions and the presentation on court. De Minaur's out there cold as ice, intense and calm at the same time. He's not reacting positive or negative as dramatically as Fokina is. And there just seems to be a relaxation in De Minaur's approach to each and every point that completely eludes Davidovich Fokina in a high-pressure final. And the last item of the notebook dump is this. In this matchup between two return-oriented, movement-oriented players, I suspected De Minaur would make more returns in play than Fokina. This was the case. 82% in play for Alex, which is sky high, really forcing Davidovich Fokina to play behind his serve. 82%. Fokina, 76%. Also very good. Definitely worse, but also very good. Tour average returns in play is 71%. You'd expect both players to be above it, given the returns and the serves. And that's all I've got on the DC final. Bublik won Stade and Kitzbühel, back-to-back titles for Sasha, who's been exceptional in the last couple months, with the exception of his first-round match at Wimbledon. Now, over the 2 title runs, only one singular top 100 victory, which came over Francisco Comesaña. But just the fact that Bublik was playing these events was noteworthy in itself. A guy who's been on the record many times as hating clay. A guy who you wouldn't expect to necessarily pass up an opportunity in the calendar to take vacation in order to play 250s in general. But that's exactly what Bublik has done here. Now, I don't take this as a clay statement. My takeaway is not, oh, Bublik is good on clay now, because Stade and Kitzbühel are both north of 2,000 feet of altitude. This isn't really clay. This is altitude clay. The altitude completely offsets the surface when it comes to the speed of the conditions. And I don't, I don't really consider this as an insertion into some sort of evidence that Bublik is great on clay now, but I do insert it into evidence when it comes to Bublik's newfound commitment, newfound stability, the fact that he is focused enough and his game is reliable enough to sustain winning for 2 weeks in a row. I don't really care who you're playing. For Alexander Bublik, for most of his career, that would have been difficult to impossible for him to do. The tactics are more clear-headed. There's less serve reliance, and it facilitates a game where on a good day, on a bad day, on a medium day, Bublik is still taking care of business against players who he's far more talented than. Luciano Darderi also went back-to-back. He won Bostad and Umag. Darderi's forehand is a great weapon. I've always liked it. He plays with a lot of offensive imagination, great drop shots. He's got very strong legs. He has enough firepower to win off of clay, but he is still yet to do much of that other than the third round at Wimbledon that you could argue was the beginning of this run of form for Luciano Darderi. So let's see how he follows this up. Obviously, we're talking about post-Wimbledon clay 250s. You're not going to make any massive leaps as far as changing your opinions on these players. We'll finish up now with a little Toronto preview where 4 out of the top 6 seeds are not in the draw. Alcaraz, Sinner, and Djokovic have all withdrawn with either fatigue or couldn't be bothered syndrome. While Jack Draper is in a bit of a different boat. He has a real injury at this point. I forget exactly what it was, so I just don't want to throw it out. But he's also going to be out of Cincinnati. So Draper, I don't know that I would necessarily lump him in. Only two and a half weeks between Wimbledon and the start of the Canada Masters, which really isn't enough time if you're a Sinner, if you're an Alcaraz. This is vacation time. This is recharge, rest, recover ahead of the North American hardcourt swing. The turnaround was way too quick. Now, because the calendar is shifting around, it'll be a full 3 weeks next year. But for this year, it was no surprise to see these guys pull out. It will be opportunity for some others, though. So again, this won't be a traditional preview. I'm just going to run through the quarters and give my thoughts and then give a prediction. So Zverev is the number 1 seed. He will not be happy with his draw because he will most likely have to beat either Talon Griekspoor or Francisco Cerundolo in order to even reach the quarterfinals, and he hates playing both those guys. Now, Zverev comes off of a training block in Spain with Tony Nadal. That's very positive. He's finally gotten some rest. I feel that Zverev had played way too much tennis in 2025. So it wouldn't shock me if Zverev looks re-energized and plays his best tennis again. But I'm also not counting on it. I want to see it first. As we know, Zverev has really not looked great since the Australian Open, with the exception of the 1 week run in Munich, and that's just not really enough to have me feeling confident that he's going to come in as the number 1 seed with this opportunity on a hard court especially, and take full advantage and win this title. Defending champion is in here, Alexei Popyrin. I think he is clearly not playing well enough to save himself from a huge loss of rankings points. I just did want to mention him because he's here. Rune pulled out of DC with a back injury. I do like his draw, but this is the toughest part of the year physically for everybody. And Rune has never done well at these events this time of the year. So he's got to prove it to me, especially after the physical issue just last week. Daniil Medvedev continues to look very beatable. Lost to Corentin Moutet in Washington. I was not too surprised by that defeat because Musetti does the two things that trouble Medvedev most: elite speed and heavily varied attacking. But Medvedev just might be the best prepared player in here. He got some good reps in the DC heat. He at least appears to be in an okay headspace. Temper tantrum after the Musetti loss, notwithstanding. Am I crazy about Daniil Medvedev's tennis right now? No. But do I think he can take advantage of a softer draw at an outdoor hardcourt Masters 1000, a time of the year where traditionally he has played well? Yes, I do. Something tells me that this might be Medvedev's best tournament of the year. So I'm going to put him ahead to the semis. Musetti's quarter. Hardcourt is still the hardest surface for Lorenzo to win on. And now it's been a very long time since he's won a match after losing to Norrie last week in DC. These aren't bad hardcourt conditions for Ruud. This is a medium hardcourt. It's not really on the quicker end like what we'll see at Cincinnati or the US Open. But Ruud is just not a regular contender at hardcourt Masters 1000s. Canada in 2022 is still his last semifinal at this kind of event. And as I said at the start of the year, he has regressed on hardcourt from a pure results standpoint since that 2022 when he actually had a collection of impressive results. Karen Khachanov had himself a very nice grass court season. And his runs have usually come at majors, not masters, but Canada is actually the only 1000 where Khachanov has made multiple semifinals in his career. He likes these conditions. He's got good draw opportunity. I still think there's some gas left in the tank for Khachanov, and he is my semifinalist. Ben Shelton's quarter. This quarter's funny. It's like a mini Washington redo. Shelton, De Minaur, Tiafoe, Norrie, Nakashima, Kaboli. They are all in here, and they were all in the mix in DC. So we're going to get some quick rematches here. De Minaur made the final last time he played this tournament. But with his style, I don't think he can go back-to-back. I think it's too physical. And by the way, and this is a credit to De Minaur, I don't even think he really played his best tennis last week in Washington, D.C. Again, that's the sign of a really awesome player, is when you don't have to play your best tennis to win a title. But it's not as if I feel like De Minaur is on fire right now when it comes to form. I do think he'll be very motivated to keep charging forward, though, because he has no points to defend for the next month. So it's not really a mental thing for De Minaur. I just think it might be a physical thing and transitioning and getting used to new conditions. I'm not going to pick him through to the semifinal. This hardcourt is a little bit slow for Tiafoe, and it's always a tough come down for Francis after Washington, before Cincinnati, where he's the reigning finalist. I think it's a really tough calendar spot mentally for Tiafoe when it comes to his focus. So I'm not going to predict big things for Francis. I'd watch for Norrie as the 31 seed. He's been playing top 20 tennis for the last month or so, to my eyes. I guess he kind of broke out of his slump with the semifinal in Geneva the week before Roland Garros. These slower hard courts in hot conditions are probably the best conditions for Norrie, maybe other than grass, because the grass really accentuates his backhand. But these hot, medium hard courts, that really accentuates his physicality. So it's, Norrie's tough on these in these conditions. Flavio Kaboli didn't have much of a chance to do well in DC because he was coming from the Hopman Cup, which was in Italy. So it's a crazy jet lag, crazy turnaround. But now he's had some time in the States, and I do think he's going to keep surging after his Wimbledon breakthrough. I was between Shelton and Kaboli here. Very tough call. I'm going to go with Flavio. And lastly, Taylor Fritz's quarter. Washington was also a tough turnaround for Taylor. He was one of the few players who went deep at Wimbledon and still elected to play not only Canada, but even Washington. So, and by the way, it was a pretty good effort from Fritz. Davidovich Fokina has always given him some issues, and Taylor was up 5-3, I want to say, in the third set of that match. I might be butchering it, the specifics of it, but Taylor had a big lead in that match against Davidovich Fokina, and Foki ended up coming back and winning. So it was honestly still a decent effort by Fritz in DC. The high seed opposite him in this quarter is Rublev. Fritz has had great success against Rublev his entire career. He's kind of the obvious guy in form on his best surface. I'm picking Fritz through to another semifinal. As for my overall prediction, I want to take a big swing here for Canada, because at the end of the day, I'd be surprised if we aren't surprised by what happens here, which is, by the way, par for the course for what we've seen in the last few years. Alexei Popyrin winning the title last year. Pablo Carreño Busto winning the title a couple years ago. Riley Opelka making his first and, to this date only, Masters 1000 final. As would be the case for De Minaur, who made the final in 2023 when Jannik Sinner beat him. And Sinner, obviously, not a huge shock. In fact, it was overdue. But let's not forget, it was Jannik Sinner's first career Masters 1000. So I'm going to continue to roll with that vibe and go Flavio Caboli defeating Daniil Medvedev in the final in Toronto. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.